My headphones have a very long cable, which is great for moving around, but I'd run over it all the time and get it all tangled in the wheels of my chair, which is why in a previous video I built this little contraption which picks up all the slack in the cable so I never run over it ever again, and I was really happy with it. However, after using it for a few months, it became obvious that it leaves a little to be desired. So in this video, I'm going to strip it all down so I can reuse the parts to make a new and improved version that will fix the shortcomings of the original one. And I just want to say thank you so much to everyone for watching my videos and leaving such lovely comments. I read every single one, but unfortunately I just can't reply to them all because there's been so many. You've given me some really great advice though, and you've also been super encouraging, so thank you. I can't believe how fast this channel has grown. It's been, well, honestly, it's been a bit overwhelming, but at the same time, it's incredibly exciting and I'm looking forward to sharing more with you in the future. Before we start building anything, let's just quickly recap how the original system worked and how we're going to improve it with the new version. In the old system, we had 3 pulleys configured in this arrangement with my headphone cable running between them. The bottom pulley has a weight on it, which means as the cable moves in and out, any slack in the rest of the cable gets taken up by the weight pulling down. As a lot of you noticed, this back pulley here doesn't actually need to spin, which is quite right, but I left it in to relieve the strain on the cable as it makes a 90-degree bend. We can replace that with a block of wood though, which will let me use the pulley in some future build. The main issue I've been encountering, and a lot of you pointed this out, is the constant tension on the cable. Initially, it really didn't feel that bad, but over time, it got pretty annoying. There are a few simple fixes for this. One would be to put some sort of cable between the top block and the bottom pulley, which would stop the weight taking in any more slack when it gets to a certain position. Another very similar idea would be to just chuck something on the floor, which would also stop the weight from going down any further. Like I said, nice and simple, but both of these options have the same disadvantage, which is that you only really get one position where the slack is right. But I've got an idea that could fix that and let me have the perfect amount of slack in the cable at any position. To show you how it works, I just need to quickly make something. As you can see, I've finally upgraded my saw, but I just want to remind you that the best tool for any job is the one you've got, so keep screeching away with the hacksaw if that's what you have. A big part of why I love hand tools is because they're nice and quiet, so making can be a more relaxing experience, and this new saw is much more peaceful than the hacksaw. If you've been following along with the footage, you might be thinking I've done a terrible job of cutting out that circle, but the egg shape is actually intentional. This is called a cam, and the idea is there's a gap underneath it in this position, but as the cam rotates, the gap closes up. So if I was to put, for example, my headphone cable underneath it and pull it to the right, the cam will cinch down on it and prevent it from going any further, whereas if I pull to the left, the cable can slip right through. We basically just made a one-way valve, but for cables. I think this and the previous version would work with basically any cable that you want to make retractable. A lot of you were mentioning that some kitchen sinks with retractable hoses use a weighted system, and that telephone exchange cables worked in a similar way back in the day, which is fascinating. With my workspace tidied away a bit, we can see the layout for the new version. The cable will come over the strain relieving block of wood, down to the weighted pulley, back up and over the other pulley, and through the cam block, which will prevent the cable from going backwards. I'll add a little handle to the cam so I can disengage it and let the weight fall, taking up all the slack. With all the bits laid out, I can mark out their positions and where I need to make some cuts and some holes, but first I'm going to shape the strain relieving block so it's back to the files to quickly knock that out. With that done, I can move on to the scrap of pallet wood that will be the backing plate. As nice as the live edge is, I'll cut it off to neaten things up a bit. The cam needs a surface to press against, so I can cut another bit of scrap down to size.
Oh no.
And then drill some holes for the shafts, for the cam and the pulley. The hole I drilled was a little undersized, so I can very delicately enlarge it, and then the shaft fits perfectly. This time I've actually got the nuts for the bolts. To fill you in on the lore of why I didn't have them last time, I've got 2 different types of 3mm bolts, each with a slightly different thread pitch, which means they use different nuts. My genius solution for storing both types of nuts is to just chuck them all in the same jar, and so I literally just couldn't find any of the nuts for my longer bolts, and that's why I ended up not using them last time. But after a bit of digging, I managed to find enough of the ones I needed. In all that rummaging, I also found some 3mm bushings that should hopefully upgrade the pulley and the cam to run a bit more smoothly over their shafts. I can secure the shafts using the rediscovered nuts, then turn my attention to mounting the other bits and bobs, which just took some drilling and screwing. The back of this thing isn't going to win any prizes, but it's so much better than the previous version. And this is basically the functioning system. We just need a top plate to be able to mount it to the desk, and for that I'm going to reuse the exact same piece of wood from the last one after a bit of tidying up. The final finishing touches were to add a cable guide made out of some copper wire, which I also pilfered from the last one, which just keeps the cable in the right spot. And by jamming a bit of leftover lampshade frame into an appropriately sized hole in the cam, I can make the release handle, which lets me do the first test. And I was so happy with how this was working, but that happiness was very short-lived. On the close-up, you can see what's going wrong. The cam isn't getting out of the way enough when it's in the disengaged position. Without it, the weight goes up and down with no worries, so the cam is definitely the problem. I marked where it was rubbing and then went to town with the files. After a bit of backwards and forwards between testing and reshaping, I ended up with something that is completely unrecognizable from its former self. With this new shape, the cam still bites down on the wire and stops the weight going down, but also gets completely out of the way while it's disengaged. Now, when there's too much tension on the headphones, I can just give it a little tug and it'll keep that slack in the system at any point in the cable. And if you need it to take in, you just lift up the handle and the slack gets gobbled up. This is a much better user experience than the first one. Thank you again for all the comments and support. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.